A new regulation is here, and you know what that means. Tier list. Hours and hours of tier list. Honestly, it's become a meme at this point, players making tier list and then other players making tier list of those players' list. And you know what? If you can't beat them, join them. But instead of one person's opinion, what if we could build the ultimate tier list, combining insights of top minds across all of competitive Pokemon? It would be the most meta tier list of the entire format. Actually, I think I could do that. In today's video, I've combined tier lists from Aaron Zheng, Joseph Ugarte, Michael Kelsch, and a ton of other high-ranking players to create the ultimate master tier list for restricted Pokemon. Interested in seeing how the pros rank them when they're all working together? Let's dive in. Our master tier list will have 6 levels. Pokemon in A tier are the strongest, dominating the competitive scene, while those in tier F, let's just say they're not winning any tournaments anytime soon. Now you're probably wondering, how do you know where the pros would place each Pokemon? That's a great question. There are 2 ways to get this information. The first, friends. Friends deeply connected to the VGC community who constantly share their insights about Pokemon and their placements. But here's the thing. I am an introvert. Asking me to manage that kind of network would be like asking me to jump out of a plane. So we're going with option 2, math. Lots and lots of math. Using simple statistical methods, I standardized each trainer's list and gave each Pokemon a numerical score based on its tier. After that, I also added a score for each Pokemon's placement within their tier. I wanted to do this because every pro's list arranged Pokemon from strongest to weakest within their tiers, and that information is just too valuable to ignore. Once we have those numbers, we normalize the scores within the tiers, total them across all lists, and calculate an average score. This gives us a clear picture of how each Pokemon ranks based on placement across every pro's list. It's a lot, but that's what I'm here for, to answer interesting VGC related questions and share some of my favorite competitive stories along the way. And by the way, if you think this concept is interesting, then do me a huge favor and help show YouTube that there's an audience for this type of content. You can do that by liking the video. It really does help out a ton. And if you're interested in seeing more of this niche VGC type content, then consider subscribing as well. Thank you. All right, it's time to dive into the rankings. Let's start with the bottom 3 tiers, F, E, and D. And honestly, that acronym feels appropriate. These are the Pokemon that, according to the pros, exist mostly to feed the higher tiers more wins. Starting with F tier, we've got the unfused, incomplete, or unevolved Pokemon. This includes base form Calyrex, Cosmog, Cosmoem, Zacian Hero, Zamazenta Hero, and base form Necrozma. This tier highlights a reoccurring issue with the bottom 3 levels. That is, most pros didn't spend much time debating which of these Pokemon was strongest or weakest for that matter. They just threw all the unusable options into the bottom of their lists without much thought to ranking them, and that's how we end up with Cosmog somehow being rated stronger than Zacian Hero, for example. This isn't going to be an issue with the stronger Pokemon on the list, but hey, I'm sorry to all of you Nebby fans. You've been robbed of your spot at the absolute bottom. Moving on to E tier, we see a slight step up. This group includes Giratina Origin, Kyurem Black, base form Kyurem, and Mewtwo. Yeah, that one hurts. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I'm a huge fan of Mewtwo, so seeing him down here actually does sting a little. Finally, in D tier, we have Necrozma Duskmane, Dialga Origin, Palkia Origin, Palkia, Solgaleo, Zekrom, Giratina Alternate, Dialga, and Reshiram. Again, the order of these Pokemon is definitely skewed. I like to imagine that if you got Aaron Zheng and Marcos Perez and all the other pros in a room together, they'd look at the Pokemon in these tiers and see little multicolored but otherwise equal piles of Poke trash. They would just like scoff and start talking about Flurmane or whatever good players talk about. Of course, that's just my imagination because of the, well, friend thing. Now we're into tier C, and this is where things start to get very interesting. Sitting at the bottom of this tier is Lugia, and honestly, this makes a lot of sense. Lugia's first appearance in Generation 9 came during the first restricted format major in Scarlet and Violet at the Indianapolis Regional Championship, piloted by Chance Hines. Later in the same month, Ian Gannis brought Lugia to day 2 of another major tournament in Los Angeles. Averaging out the pros tier list places places Lugia as the weakest Pokemon in Tier C, and that sort of checks out. From what I've seen during my research for this video, pro players often use tournament results as a key metric to rank Pokemon they don't have much first-hand experience with, and you'll notice this throughout the list. Every Pokemon from here onward has had at least one strong showing at an official tournament. There's only a few exceptions to this rule, and they come up right now with Eternatus, Ho-Oh, and Rayquaza getting ranked barely above Lugia. After them, the tier list is completed with Kyurem White, Necrozma Dawnwings, and Lunala at the front. And I like this placement for Lunala. Lunala was pretty underestimated for most of the 2024 season, but it made waves by earning high placements in Japan and most famously at the 2024 World Championships. There, Brian Collins piloted it to the 41st place finish on one of the weirdest teams of the tournament. I mean, just look at this thing. That's a okie dokie. From Lunala onwards, every Pokemon has earned strong placements at the 2024 Pokemon World Championship, which is likely why the pros have rated them so highly. Kicking off Tier B is Groudon. As a quick aside, when you normalize the scores between Groudon and Lunala from the previous tier, there's a difference of almost 1 full point. Now, that number might not sound like much, but ask one of your stat nerd friends, that's actually a pretty significant gap. For perspective, if you took a full point off of Lunala's score, you'd be sitting dangerously close to Nebby territory. It just goes to show you how highly the top tier players value these next Pokemon. Tier B features some of the most respected powerhouses in competitive play. Groudon, Zacian Crown, Koraidon, Kyogre, and finally Terapagos. Now, before we jump into the final tier, let's take a moment to consider something fun. Whose individual tier list came closest to this master tier list? We're about to reveal the strongest Pokemon according to the pros, so you have a bit of time to think about it. To make it easier, I'll narrow it down to 3 contenders: Marcos Perez, aka Moxie Boosted, the Road to Rank King, Aaron Cybertron Zheng, and the 2024 Pokemon World finalist, Yuta Ishigaki. Between those 3, who do you think got the closest to this list? And now we've reached the creme de la creme, the strongest Pokemon on the list. These are the ones that the greatest minds in VGC believe will define and drive the entire competitive scene. A tier. Let's try that again. A tier.
The foul play comes through into the Calyrex, does less than 50% damage, and Calyrex broke the Terra Shell with the fake out. Glacial Lance into both of those Pokemon, putting them into KO range for one more Glacial Lance.
Starting off at the bottom of A tier is Calyrex Ice Rider. This Pokemon has absolutely earned its spot near the top. With one of the most dominant seasons in all of Generation 9, Calyrex Ice has proven its worth as both a hard Trick Room sweeper and a staple on balanced teams. The latter, of course, gave us one of the greatest stories in VGC history.
In the back, so the local hero, Patrick Connors, about to go up 1-0 over France's best, Aurelien Sula.
I want to take a moment to
If you
talk
want to hear
about
about that, by the way, I've linked a video on the screen in the description. There's no doubt in my mind we'll be seeing plenty more Calyrex Ice in tournaments to come. Next in A tier is Zamazenta Crowned. Championed by big names like Joshua Lorcy and 2023 world finalist Michael Kelsch, this Pokemon has made an undeniable mark on the competitive scene. Kelsch in particular showcased Zamazenta's potential with a first place finish at the Stockholm, Sweden special event in May 2024, and an impressive third place finish at the 2024 World Championship in Honolulu, Hawaii. Unlike many other restricted Pokemon that are locked into a single role, Zamazenta brings both the stats and the toolkit to excel as an offensive threat and a supportive partner, empowering its teammates. As probably the most versatile restricted Pokemon, it's no surprise that the pros have rated this Pokemon so highly in their list. Now, the runner-up for the title of the strongest restricted Pokemon according to the pros, it's Miraidon.
It's going to be just the Draco Meteor straight out the blocks here into the Amogus. That's gone. It does not have the redirectional support anymore.
Miraidon holds a unique distinction. It won both the first and last official tournaments of Regulation G in Scarlet and Violet, including a spectacular first place finish in its debut year at the Pokemon World Championship.
We gotta see Luca Ternabelli become your 2024 Pokemon World Champion.
With its dual ability to set up electric terrain and gain a massive damage boost when electric terrain is active, this Pokemon hits like a truck, or like a really powerful bike. I mean, it's not the weirdest Pokemon concept, I guess. Perhaps the scariest thing about Miraidon is how many ways it can deal damage. With moves like Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam, Draco Meteor, and its signature move, Volt Switch, Miraidon is on every pro player's radar, and for good reason.
As if Volt Switch comes out, okay, well, you know, Incineroar is a super tanky Pokemon, Aaron. It's probably trained to survive almost all powerful special moves. Bye-bye, Incineroar. And you know what's next?
Finally, we arrive at the top of the chart, the strongest Pokemon as determined by averaging the opinions of the top players in the game.
Astro Barrage coming on out, notably too.
Calyrex Shadow Rider. Believe it or not, Shadow Rider didn't perform well at the start of the first restricted format in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. But unlike some of the Pokemon on this list, its struggles had nothing to do with its stats or moves. Sorry, Nebby. In fact, this Pokemon is so unbelievably strong that the sheer trauma it inflicted on the world's greatest players caused them to over-prepare for it at the start of the format. Some teams outright giving up on preparing for like anything else. Even with this collective anti-Shadow Rider movement, it still managed to make some pretty deep runs in some of the biggest major tournaments of the year, winning regional level events in both the United States and Europe. Some of the greatest minds in the game, like Justin Knox, Marco Silva, and Wolf Glick, swear by it as one of the best, if not the best, restricted Pokemon in the game. With endorsements like that, it's no wonder Calyrex Shadow Rider claims the title of the strongest on this aggregated list of pro players' opinions. And with that, we've built a master tier list that reflects the rankings from some of the world's strongest players. But before we wrap it up, did you guess whose individual tier list came closest to matching this one? Here's the complete list for reference and the 3 choices I gave you earlier: Marcos Perez, Aaron Cybertron Zheng, and Yuta Ishigaki. Drum roll, please. The answer is Aaron Cybertron Zheng. When I crunched the numbers and averaged the differences between the pros' Pokemon placements and our master tier list, Aaron's list came the closest. Makes you think this guy must like know what he's talking about or something, huh? As always, future champs, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's good seeing you guys again, and I can't wait to share all of the awesome battles and amazing adventures we're going to have together in this new year. I've got so much planned for this year, including a video that means a lot to me personally coming out, I think, by the end of March. If you're watching this later, I'd love for you to go check it out. It's one of my favorite projects yet. But of course, as always, thanks for watching.
Pika pika.